But I want to pivot now to the race for the Democratic nomination. He's up by 9 in New Hampshire and closing the gap in Iowa. And there has not been any polling as of late in Iowa since Bernie Sanders walked the picket line last Friday in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which I think is going to be very impressive to voters who know that there is what I've been talking about for a long time, a sense of realism, authenticity. You know the guy. They're getting to know the guy, Bernie Sanders, and he's for the workers. He's for the middle class. Is that going to be enough to put him over the hump in Iowa where he would win the first 2 primaries? It's going to be interesting, but this certainly is a scenario that's playing out that the Clinton camp did not anticipate. For more on all of that, John Nichols, Washington correspondent of The Nation, who has recently written a piece, The Pathway for Bernie Sanders and the Electoral Map to Get There. John, good to have you with us.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Ed.
Did you think 6 months ago you'd be writing a piece talking about a pathway for Bernie Sanders?
No. I did not. Like you, Ed, I've interviewed most of the people that are running or that were thinking about running, including Bernie Sanders, a lot. And, Sanders always said it would take a political revolution. It would require, a lot of our standard political calculations to be sort of blown up for him to do this. It wasn't some sort of predictable route. What's fascinating is that this year has proven
Produced
that
it.
This year's proven that people are ready for something different.
Yeah.
And I think that what that's done, and we still don't know where this is all going to end up, let's be honest, but one thing that's done is essentially tell Bernie Sanders he can be himself. And that's very rare in politics. Most politicians feel like they got to fit into the mold. And you saw Sanders being himself on Friday out in Iowa, where he went and joined the picket line at a grain milling or starch plant where workers are really beaten around.
The corporate media will not use the term movement. They just say, well, Bernie's getting crowds. Well, Bernie's going in the polls. No one predicted this, as no one predicted what Trump is doing right now.
Right.
So this is a strange year in politics, but it also, I think, underscores that the corporate media does not know where the American people are, that they don't have the pulse of what is really concerning Americans. John, what is the pathway for Bernie Sanders?
Well, I mean, look, I think we can understand it on the basic map, which is that Sanders now looks to be in very good position in New Hampshire, the first primary state. Iowa comes shortly before that. He is closing in on Clinton, not in a lead, but getting a lot closer. And I think moves like what you saw on Friday, the unexpected move of joining a picket line with striking grain mill workers or grain mill union members, bakery, confectionery. I think that those things begin to lock in support there. He's putting a lot of organizers in. He could win Iowa. Not saying he will, but he could. If he wins Iowa and New Hampshire, then there's very little doubt that people are going to look at him anew. At that pivot point, that's late in the game, honestly, but they start to look at him anew, and that becomes the critical leap, is if at that point where he's won some critical tests, Democrats, grassroots Democrats across this country, look at him and say, I actually believe this guy can not only win the nomination, but he might actually be able to win the presidency. If they start to look at him that way, then he can start to win a lot more primaries and caucuses.
He's going to. I think Bernie has to win those two. He has to win the first caucus, the first primary. He has to win Iowa and New Hampshire. And the reason why I say that is that there just seems to be this narrative that continually lingers out there that some Democrats believe that, well, Bernie can't win, that they buy the socialist label, they buy, the independent label, or he couldn't raise the money, won't take the PAC money, and all this kind of stuff. The fact is, he's going to need to win those two to erase that conversation and turn some heads within the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. Strong liberals don't pay attention to that. Strong liberals are on issues. And there's a moral judgment that's being rendered on issues, and that's where his authenticity and his genuineness comes in. Now, I could be wrong. I could be wrong on all this, but how does he erase this almost whisper campaign? Well, I really like Bernie, but I don't think he can win. Why where's that coming from, and how do you erase that?
Twofold. Number one, you do have to, as you suggest, have those wins. I would suggest that it can't just be Iowa and New Hampshire. He does need to run extremely strong in Iowa. Whether he has to win or not is a debatable point, but I think probably right. Has to win New Hampshire. It's right next to Vermont. And then he's got to post some other victories shortly thereafter in places like Minnesota and Maine and Colorado. And he's got to start to crack the South. He may not have to win Southern primaries, but he's got to be a credible finisher there. So by the end of March, he has to be able to point to an electoral record that says, this guy is viable. He's for real. And then the final thing, though, is he has a responsibility himself as a candidate to talk about this. He's done a little of it. He went up to the DNC and talked about some of these factors, noting that he was beating Trump and Bush in some polls. But he's got to put the electoral concepts into the mix, not to be some sort of horse race. Look at this all the time. But he has to make a compelling case himself that he's viable, because if he doesn't do it, nobody's going to do it for him.
Yeah. John Nichols, always great to visit. See you at Bobfest coming up on the 19th of September.
You're going to have a hell of a time, brother.
It's going to be a great weekend. I wish every state in the union would do what Wisconsin does when it comes to rallying progressives. I think it's going to have a big impact. John, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Ed.
John Nichols, Washington correspondent of The Nation.